Sitting here thinking about listening to all of you, watching your videos, and I thought to myself that it seems to me sometimes DARPA's job is to put a big question out there and to set a really high expectation, and then just to watch in delight as people rise to those expectations and to learn from the really amazing variety of ways that all of you approached the question and then answered all the questions that came up. So I really got a kick out of this. This was a little bit of an experiment for us. We've never done anything like this at DARPA before, and now that we've seen these 5 students rise to our very high expectations, now my brain is spinning about what else we could do next. It's my great pleasure today to make the awards to our video student competition winners. And what I'm going to do is give each of these folks their award, and we're going to take a picture together, and then we'll get a picture with all 5 of you together. So I'm going to start with Christina. So come on up and get your award, Christina. Thanks so much, everyone. It's my great pleasure next to introduce Dr. Brad Towsley, the director of our Tactical Technologies Office. Come on up, Brad.
Thanks, Arthi. I've had the privilege for the last 3 years of being in charge of the office that sponsored the DRC. See Gil's coming back up. It was a great honor. But now we're going to talk a little bit for the next hour or so about future technology and applications beyond the DRC. As you know, the DARPA Robotics Challenge was primarily about humanitarian and disaster relief with challenging communications and a human-centric environment with human tools, with a series of challenging tasks that were obviously made more difficult by the communications going up and down. But you can think about a host of other applications and mission areas that we might consider robotic technologies. Earlier this morning, you heard the international contributors talking about a number of things, a number of plans and missions areas that they're thinking about specifically for robotic applications. But to that, you can also add things like manufacturing and industrial applications or logistics. You can go all the way into space and think about space robotics, human space flight, or unmanned space flight. You can think about homeland security and first responders. You know, first responders, you can consider that a piece of humanitarian disaster relief, or you consider that part of everyday life. But all of those capabilities, all of those applications require some degree of human-machine interaction. And if you spent any time in the garage this week, you saw that there were 23 different teams with 23 different approaches, and you got a chance to hear about 3 of them today. All those systems and all those applications require some amount of actuators, reconfigurability, human-machine interaction, sensors, algorithms, and performance. But in order to discuss that and to discuss where it's going in the future, what we want to do is bring up 3 experts. And so what I'm going to just bring to the stage now, I'd like to welcome Dr. Rodney Brooks of Rethink Robotics. You come up, Dr. Brooks. I'd also like to welcome to the stage Dr. Robert Ambrose from NASA Johnson Space Center. And I'd also like to welcome to the stage Dr. Robert Griffin from the Department of Homeland Security. And so what's going to happen is I'm going to introduce each of them, and they've got about 10 or 15 minutes of remarks and thoughts they're going to share with you. And at the end of that, we're going to take a couple of questions with each one of them. I think that'll go well. So first, Dr. Rodney Brooks is the founder, chairman, and CTO of Rethink Robotics, a company that is deploying low-cost, safe, and easy-to-train interactive humanoid robots in manufacturing and packaging applications. He was also the co-founder, chief technology officer, and board member of iRobot Corporation. Everybody probably knows that. And is the emeritus Panasonic professor of robotics at MIT. That's why he's also Professor Brooks, where he was the director of the MIT Computer Science and Artificial Intelligence Laboratory until 2007. In his current role, Dr. Brooks has set the pace for redefining automation with smart collaborative robots that adapt to real-world variability and excel in semi-structured environments. You heard some of our speakers today talk about the structure of the environments. But today he's going to share his thoughts with us on the future of technology that will enable companies looking to boost flexibility, efficiency, and quality in their operations. Please welcome Dr. Brooks.
Well, thank you. And I think the 3 of us are following people who already answered the questions that we're talking about in the future. Atticus, Shiloh, Hector, Ben, and Christina, congratulations to all of you. And thank you for mostly answering the questions. My slides are up, great. I want to talk about near-term future of robotics. And this picture sort of says it all to me. This is Mildred, a woman who works in a plastics factory in Connecticut. She's worked on the line her whole life. This photo is from 1 hour after she met her first robot, by which time she had trained the robot to do a simple task in her factory. So it's about robots and people intertwining in various ways. We've seen a certain class of intertwining happening in the garage over the last few days. And this nature of intertwining is going to vary with the application and, importantly, the price of the robot. I'll get to that in a second. But we've talked about autonomy today, and we can go from pure autonomy, a pure teleoperation, where and this is what we had 50 years ago, where a person controlled everything, to supervisory teleoperation, where the person specifies the gross motions, to task-level autonomy. We just specify the task. And we saw in the 3 talks this morning those various levels and sliding between them up to total autonomy, where you deploy the robot and it makes all the decisions. Now, if you step back for a second, you think, well, robots that are totally autonomous, they must be really sophisticated. They must be really expensive. And so if you looked at the price versus degree of autonomy of robots, you'd expect that the graph would look something, be in that red zone somewhere, that cheap robots wouldn't be very autonomous and expensive robots would be more autonomous. But in fact, if you look at deployed robots on the market, they sort of go the opposite way. The cheaper robots are more autonomous, like the iRobot Roomba. And these are both iRobot robots. And the PackBot, which was deployed in 4,500 of them in Afghanistan and Iraq doing roadside bombs, are much more expensive, but are much less autonomous. Now, why is that? Well, if it's a cheap robot, you can't afford a whole person to operate it. That wouldn't be cheap anymore. If it's an expensive robot, you don't want it's doing something really important, you don't want to screw up, so you put a person in the loop. And so what we're going to see over time, I think we're going to see this for the next 10, 20 years, the cheaper robots are going to be more autonomous, and if you want an autonomous robot, it's got to be cheaper. And I just put up a set of tasks that I see outside of the military, that we will have robots being more and more robots over the next few years. And as we go down that, roughly we go from what are going to be the expensive robots. Surgery robots are going to continue to be expensive robots, and you can afford to put a high-priced surgeon in control of a surgery robot because it's such an important task they're doing. But if you get down to cleaning the floor, it's got to be a cheaper robot. And if it's going to be elder care robots for everybody, they have to be cheap robots. We can't have expensive elder care robots and have them widely deployed. And you know, it's not exactly a linear scale there. Driving, fulfillment, manufacturing, I sort of group together as being roughly the same sort of complexity and the same level of autonomy that's needed. But I'll talk, since I've been working on manufacturing the last few years, I'll just talk a little bit more about manufacturing to give some of the flavor of how I see things going, because I think that leads to what the other sorts of robots might look like. This, by the way, is a production line for robots in China from around 2004, where the Roomba is made. 14 million of them being made by hand. So 14 million robots made by hand. That's somehow something's wrong with that. You know, I started to think about, well, could we build them in the United States? Could we use robots? But robots in manufacturing tend to look like this. And notice the difference between the two. All people, no robots. All robots, no people, exactly because of the safety issues that some of the students just brought up a minute ago. And, you know, are you going to go in and replace all these people all at once with robots? I don't think so. I think if we're going to see robots creep into our lives, it's not replacing everything all at once. It's putting a little piece in there, getting the robots to do a few of the tasks at a time. So that has led to this new category of robots in manufacturing, and there's a number of companies now who are talking about their collaborative robot offerings, where you have the robots and the people working side by side without the cages. They have to be safe. And in this is a common application of that robot Baxter, where people are dexterously putting parts or putting things into containers which are going into a heat sealer. They come out of the heat sealer. There's not much dexterity, but they're sort of hot, and the robot picks them up and moves them on to the next task rather than have a person pick up the hot stuff. And here you see a person in amongst robots. These robots are doing packing of plastic furniture kits, and you know, that person has their back to the robot. You wouldn't want to put your back to an industrial robot because the industrial robot's not going to be safe, not going to be aware of you. And the other thing is making the robots easier to use, so moving towards the sort of user interfaces we expect in our consumer goods, but we haven't had with robots. And this is not a criticism, but I'm sort of betting that if you go to those 23 groups in the garage, and Holly, I guess you've been studying this, you were there watching them all. I'm sort of guessing if you go to look at those interfaces, they were specialist interfaces for engineers. They weren't the interfaces that you would, the level of interface that you would expect to have on your smartphone of ease of use. So trying to put those ease of use interfaces into robots is going to be important so that ordinary people can interact with them, train them, get them to do what they want to do. Here's someone training a Baxter in a factory. Oh, I don't need that sound. And I misplaced the movie here, but this is a Baxter robot putting circuit boards in a circuit board tester that previously a person had been putting them in, and instead of using high precision, this is using force sensing. And force sensing and the feeling forces and controlling forces is going to be more and more important as we get rid of cages so that people and robots can be in the same place. The robots are not hurting the people. That's really important. And you get the, you know, people can do very precise tasks because they use fixturing, and the robot's using exactly the same fixturing as a person uses. And more than that, the robot has to be easy for people to interact with. And so here's, you know, a person back driving a robot arm, showing it various motions, etc. It's got to be easy and fluid and close together. And that's not what we're seeing yet with the sort of robots that we saw in disaster relief. And really in disaster relief, they don't have to be so fluid and together with the people because the people can't be there. But for our everyday lives, the people and the robots have to be together. Now, I want to make a point which I think was driven home to me by the previous set of DARPA robot challenges, the Grand Challenge, the Urban Challenge, etc. To make big progress in robotics, or almost any field, you need to get lots of people working on the hard problems. It can't be just 1 or 2 people or 10 people. It has to be hundreds of people and thousands of people. And that's what this DARPA Robot Challenge has done, is bringing people together to work on this common disaster relief problem. But I want to go back to navigation of robots. For me, the beginning of time is 1977, because that's when I came to the US as a graduate student and started at Stanford University. And at that time, as far as I could tell, there were 3 mobile robots in the world that were actively used for research. With 3 mobile robots, there were hardly any people working on them. And so I started helping out with one of the mobile robots at Stanford. By 1985, in the same conference, Raja Chatila and Jean-Paul Lemon from France and I published the idea of loop closing, which is part of the simultaneous localization and mapping problem. But we both had really terrible statistical models. I claim my statistical model was much worse than theirs. And it required more people to come in and work on it to turn that very primitive SLAM. Probably only 10 people in the world read these papers because there was no one really working on it. But it was during the late 80s and early 90s when we got low-cost mobile platforms that lots and lots of universities could buy, and then they could build their software on top of that, that we started getting lots of people working on simultaneous localization and mapping. And very soon, they outstripped anything that I or Raja had done in terms of statistical models. And as we got hundreds and then thousands of people working on it, we got better and better algorithms. And that led to the technologies that were able to be taken up by the DARPA, DARPA Grand Challenge and the DARPA Urban Challenge, which then, you know, we had people working on those robots in the competition, but then it spun off into places like Google and Daimler and other places for self-driving cars. So it was that low-cost hardware that enabled lots and lots and lots of people to work on similar problems that gets us results. Hold that thought, because I'm going to come back to that in a second. Oh, yeah, so hardware availability leads to crowds of researchers, leads to well-defined problems and solutions. In fact, when we were talking about simultaneous localization and mapping, first we didn't have a formal definition of it. I don't know if John Leonard is still here, but John and Hugh Durant-White around 1991 really formalized the whole problem when there were lots of people thinking about it. But what is really going to drive robotics over the next 10, 20, and 30 years? And I think it's a problem that we see all over the world, and that is the aging demographic. This is the percentage of adults who are of working age. And the percentage of adults who are of working age has gone down a little bit over the last 40 years, but it's about to take a really steep turn, and I'm a leading indicator of this. I'm right there, turning into old age. And I'm glad there are some people over there working here. The number of, the proportion of adults who are still of working age is going to go down dramatically, which means there's a lot less people to provide services to the elderly. And I see it as a matter of people having dignity to control their own lives by having assistive devices. I view the modern automobiles with lots of safety features as elder care robots, because it lets the elderly drive safely longer and lets them have control of their lives longer. And we're going to want to have more and more robotic sorts of devices in our homes which let the elderly, i.e. me, have control of my life longer. We saw the 3Ds, the 4Ds. I have the 3Ms. If we're going to have robots in our houses to help with elder care, there are 3Ms: mobility, messiness, and manipulation. Now let's go back to that previous thought. about hardware availability. I'm going to connect those two. Mobility. If you look at real houses, they have stairs all over them. And if you have an architect, you have weird stairs, like in the bottom middle. But everyone has stairs, like in the top left and top right and the bottom right. That's there. Do we have platforms so that we can get lots and lots of people working on that? Unfortunately, no. We have pack bots, and you don't want that in your house, trust me. We have some of the robots these two robots that we saw here at the challenge, and you probably don't want those in your house either. That's sort of bad when they fall over. So unfortunately for mobility right now, we do not have, as I can see it, a low-cost platform to explore mobility in the house. I think that's a real lack yet. That's mobility. Messiness. This is a picture from someone's thesis of a simulated kitchen, to have a robot working in the simulated kitchen. Aaron Edsinger, my PhD student at his thesis defense, showed a picture of his kitchen. That's the reality we have to deal with, not the one on the left. The robots have to deal with the stuff on the right. This is good news. This is good news. The good news is that the gaming industry has produced low-cost 3D sensors, and now we see at ICRA last week, we see paper after paper using 3D sensors trying to make sense of that messiness. I don't think we've got it completely well-defined yet, but there's lots of people working on it, so I'm confident that over the next few years, that stuff is going to happen. We're going to get much better at dealing with messiness. Third one was manipulation. We've seen Kiva acquired by Amazon. Beautiful technological solution, and it avoided the manipulation problem as being too hard. It handled the movement of the shelves, but left the manipulation to people. Robust hands, which are good at manipulation, which can do manipulation, the software, the sensors, the actuators, the materials, all those things haven't been brought together. And we've had years after year, we haven't had great advances on hands and manipulation software. We don't have a lot of platforms for that. So that is something to come yet. So maybe you guys over there can tell me a fourth M, but these are my 3 M's. Mobility in the house, messiness, and manipulation. Some things we have low-cost hardware, some things we don't yet. But I think this is what the solutions to all these problems for robots in all applications is going to be a little more like than our current robots mostly, and that's going to be people and robots closely together, interacting in safe ways, not separating the operator back in the garage away from the action of the robots. It's going to be very, very organic and very, very close together. So thank you.
That was excellent. Thank you. All right, next up, we're going to go from terrestrial to space. Dr. Robert Ambrose is the Division Chief of the Software, Robotics, and Simulation Division at NASA's Johnson Space Center. In his current role, he's responsible for flight spacecraft software, space robotics, and system manipulations for human spaceflight missions. Within the division are 5 branches responsible for manage on-orbit refueling systems for the International Space Station, development of software for the multi-purpose crew vehicle and future human spaceflight systems, simulations for engineering development and training, hardware and software, hardware in the loop facilities for anomaly resolution and crew training, and the technology branch for the development of new robotic systems. Today, Dr. Ambrose is going to talk with us about the future technologies that will enable space robotics to better assist in human spaceflight missions. Please welcome Dr. Ambrose.
Good afternoon. I'm going to make 2 main points. Let's see if we go to the next slide here. I want to talk about how robots that can work around objects and in interfaces built for humans will enable all sorts of new things, including human exploration, some new approaches that we're going to be taking. And then I want to talk about an investment that we and other agencies are going to be making in this community because we think what you're doing is extremely important. The students that we've seen today and over the course of this event are going to be the first generation that will have a new approach to exploration. And it's enabled by the kind of robots that we've seen here at the DRC. We're very interested in robots that can work with tools that are built for astronauts, something that we've been doing for a number of years, but combining that with an ability to get around in a place that was built for people was really quite powerful. What previous explorers have had to do was they had to take it all with them. They lived off the land, of course, but they had to bring everything with them to survive. That's why it took Columbus 3 boats, Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria. He had to bring it all with him. If we could have said, hey, you could deploy a shipping container full of equipment on the North American beach ahead of your first voyage, he would have had a few questions. He would have said, well, what's America? Do you have a map of this beach? And what's a shipping container? But once he'd sorted that out, he would still have had no idea how to do it. You know, the ability to pre-deploy something was just completely inconceivable to him. And I'm not just making fun of Columbus. When we went to the moon, we had to bring everything with us. That little tiny spacecraft in the background there had to have everything for the crew of 2. That rover had to unpack from it everything that they brought, and a lot of it they left behind. Had to come down in that descent vehicle, and that's why they could only stay for a couple days. But what if we could pre-deploy? What if ahead of the humans' arrival, you could pre-position assets on the surface? Well, that would be incredible, and it would allow us to go to places much further than we went in Apollo. Imagine being able to pre-deploy a return vehicle, an ascent vehicle that could fuel itself. Imagine pre-positioning habitats and solar power systems and rovers that the crew will use. Now, they might have to be there for years waiting. There are launch windows to Mars about every 26 months. So the robots might be a little lonely taking care of all of this equipment, but that's fine. And when the crew would arrive, they would get to use the equipment and then depart, and maybe, again, the robots are left to take care of it all, again, for many years. We wouldn't do that necessarily to a person, but robots will handle it quite well. So that's a very exciting idea to us. It would open up a new approach to exploration where we could kind of lay siege to a planet, logistically positioning equipment in advance. It's really opened up by this idea that robots could work with the same stuff that's built for people, because every one of those assets that we would put on Mars will be all about people. The hatches will be for people, all the tools, all the interfaces, it'll be all about people. They're just not there yet. There are a number of terrestrial industries that are in a similar situation. And I think this approach to having robots that can move through access corridors built for humans and work with tools and interfaces built for people will open up whole new ways of doing business. For example, an offshore rig. Maybe people are there seasonally, but most of the year, maybe not. Maybe it goes down to just a skeleton crew, or maybe no people at all, and it's just robots for 9-10 months out of the year. And imagine in nuclear storage facilities, built by people, built for people maybe originally, but after you've got material stored there, probably a bad place for humans. And again, a great thing for robots to take care of. So I believe that the skills that we've seen demonstrated over the last few days are going to be important for space, but also a number of other industries, not just on a bad day when there has been a disaster, but on every day when robots can help. I've been part of the National Robotics Initiative for several years now. It was kicked off in 2011. What a great opportunity for the agencies to get together, and this year we're going to be adding the Department of Energy, all making contributions in their own ways, and we appreciate how each agency has its own idea of how to help our country. And certainly all of the world will benefit, like we've seen in the DRC. And today I want to talk about an investment we're going to make back in you. So if we could roll the video, please, and I'll talk while it's running. We're going to give out a couple robots. And let's kill the audio, and I'll just talk over it. So we had a Valkyrie robot at the trials. and no excuses. We didn't do well. Even a humanoid can have a bad day. But what I tell all my humans and humanoids that work for me is it's not if you get knocked down, it's how you get up. And we're very happy that both NSF and NASA have continued to invest in our effort here, and we've got a couple new robots that we would like to give out. These are pretty capable machines, very dexterous above the waist, and with some software additions that we've gotten from IHMC, Jerry Pratt's team, pretty good balancing. We're excited about what this community might do with some of these machines. So we just heard from Rodney Brooks that it's very important to have hardware available to the community, and we of course absolutely agree with that. Now I've only got a couple to give out, and maybe more to come in the future. But we think that if we can put these out, especially with the open source tools that we have, that will lead to great things. A lot of kids taking selfies with the robot, a lot of little boys, a lot of little girls. Very excited to see what robots will do as they come of age, and we want to make sure that we give researchers the hardware that they need to take those next steps. The machines are going to be ready at the end of summer, and eligibility is that we're giving out these robots to the U.S. teams. They have to be universities, and they have to apply. I figured that you guys might be a little tired right now, so we've decided to push the proposals out till August, so you have a chance to sober up. To take a vacation and relax a little bit, and then write us a proposal. And we're really looking forward to seeing what you might want to do with these machines. This is the solicitation, but you can Google it. It's out on FedBizOps. So why are we doing this? Well, we want to invest in this community. We're convinced that you're going to help solve the problems that we need solved for space, as well as several other industries. And in addition to giving out the robots, we're going to give these labs some funding. So in addition to getting a robot, you're going to get a grant to do some things with it. We would like follow-ons to the DARPA Robotics Challenge. We've got some ideas for a Space Robotics Challenge to leverage a lot of the great technology and following DARPA's lead. We'd like to push it even further. So these host labs, they would like to get a Valkyrie robot delivered. We'll be able to apply, we can give them a grant, and we would like to use them to validate some tasks. More to come on that. We've already put an RFI out looking for ideas for how to run such a challenge. I've spent some time talking to the DARPA Brain Trust about their ideas on a challenge, and I've already incorporated a number of their good suggestions. So, take a good vacation. You've earned it. And when you come back, write us a proposal, and we would like to put a robot in your lab. So the main points, we think that robots that can work with interfaces built for humans, climbing, crawling, walking through a world built for humans, will enable all sorts of new things in space exploration and here on Earth. We think the skills that have been demonstrated in the DARPA Robotics Challenge are ideal for enabling these space opportunities and other industries as well. And so that's why we want to invest in you, the community that's made this great step, and we want to keep it going. So with that, I think I'll just turn it over to the next speaker.
What we'll do is we'll hear from the last speaker, and then we'll open up the floor for questions. Dr. Robert Griffin is the Deputy Undersecretary for Science and Technology at the U.S. Department of Homeland Security. Prior to this appointment, Dr. Griffin served as the Director of the Science and Technology Directorate First Responders Group, where he led efforts to strengthen the first response community's ability to protect the homeland and respond to disasters. Today, Dr. Griffin will be sharing with us his thoughts on DHS's role in the evolution of robotics and what future technologies may enable. Please welcome Dr. Griffin.
Appreciate it. So as I'm one of the few things that stands between you and freedom, I'm going to forego a slide deck. I know it's very unfederal of me, But I hope I can carry on a conversation and keep your attention, although it is incredibly difficult to follow somebody who just gave you both a vacation and the promise of a free robot. So my bribes are nowhere near as good. If I could just take 1 second, though, and recognize the wonderful job that DARPA has done with this competition today, and if you would all join me in a round of applause for everybody at DARPA who pulled this together. I think it's an absolutely amazing event, and I just want to acknowledge the work that everybody's done. I want to say thank you. So I came to science and technology through a really strange route, and that was through the responder community. And actually, in some respects, I'm kind of a poser up here. I worked as a fire chief, and I worked in emergency management, and I'm going to talk to you about my experience with robots from the ground up, and then I'm going to sort of talk to you about why I think robots are cool, and how I think we can bring them to the street, and then I'm going to end by talking about how we can think about the future, or the near future of R&D, particularly as it pertains to work we could probably do together with DARPA, but certainly that we need to do within science and technology for the Homeland Security enterprise. Let me set the stage for you. It was in November, back in the, I believe it was 2002, but don't hold me to the date. A misty evening, freezing rain. We got reports of gunshots in a residential neighborhood. I was fire chief at the time. My units rolled up, sheriff's department set a perimeter up around a 2-story bungalow, a set of stairs front stairs that had 6 steps. Barricade situation. A man had fired some shots and then barricaded himself and his family into his residence. Deployed a SWAT team. We deployed our robot. We were lucky enough to have a robot because they're incredibly expensive. Robot got to the bottom of the stairs, decided it didn't want to go up the stairs. So we messed around with the robot for what it seemed like an incredible period of time, particularly when you're thinking about a high-stress situation. So we pulled that robot back and we sent in our second robot. That robot didn't make it out of the trailer. Cold rain, bad conditions. Robot was probably smarter than we were. We dispatched a third robot. That robot got halfway up the stairs and died on us. We weren't able to deploy that technology that we needed in that situation. I'd like to say that it was that there's a Disney ending to this story. There's not. He killed his family, and he killed himself. Not the fault of the robot, but I use the story to drive home how important consistency is going to be in order to deploy robotics in the field, and how we have to make sure that whatever we deploy can work when we need it. And I think that's part of the challenge that we're going to have to think about. I also think that it's okay, and I'm going to sort of set this as a ground rule, it's okay not to be perfect as we start to deploy technologies, because a 60% solution today is better than a 90% solution in 10 years. With that said, you'd think, wow, okay, you probably don't support robots. I actually do. Because here's what I think robots can do for us, and robotics can do for us, and why I think it's really cool. So won't it be cool to be able to take robotics and help the Coast Guard patrol our ports, both on water, above water, and underwater, and identify not only drugs, illegal smuggling, but invasive species? Wouldn't it be cool for robotics to be able to help patrol our 5,500 land miles of border on both our northern and southern borders, in areas, frankly, where there is no communications, where it's almost impossible to get patrols into, but we know we're having folks come over the border illegally? Wouldn't it be cool to be able to take something as simple as a body-worn camera and basically create a robot that can be my guardian angel, that can watch not only what's in front of me, but also help me identify what's behind me and to my sides. So as I'm going into particularly tense situations, like domestic standoffs, like shootings, like areas where my officers need to have interventions with people that don't want them there, that those robotics are there and those robots are there to help them. Wouldn't it be cool to be able to have on my ambulances nanotechnology that would allow me to arrive on the scene of a really bad crash, inject those nanotechnologies into the person who's bleeding out, help stabilize them, and have that technology speaking back to the surgeons in our emergency rooms? Wouldn't it be cool if I could take a robot and put it into our source system or put it into our water system to be able to do something as simple as measure what the condition of our critical infrastructure is? See, it doesn't always need to be complex. It can be very simple. But these are ways that robots can help our society every single day. Wouldn't it be cool in an environment that is wiped out because of a disaster to be able to work alongside robots who are able to work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, in order to restore critical infrastructure when our crews are absolutely exhausted? I can tell you the first day of a disaster, you can get 12 hours because people are running off of adrenaline. Second day, it's 8. Third day, it's 6. And after that, you're pretty much junk. And that's when people get hurt. That's when people start making bad decisions. The beauty of robots, though, is that they don't know time. They don't understand time. So time is something that's not their enemy the way it is for us. Again, that's the promise of robots in our society to me. It goes beyond just thinking about industry. It goes beyond just thinking about elder care. We're talking about the potential for societal change. One of the things that I haven't heard today I think is really important that we're going to have to continue to think about is robots are one part of the whole Internet of Things. It's one part of a whole bigger society. But that is the future. And I gotta tell you that I think the future is incredibly bright and exciting. And as someone who is also getting a little bit old, I'm really glad to hear you guys are gonna be there thinking about us. Because it makes me feel good, because we're gonna need a lot of help. I feel bad for the robots that are gonna take care of us. I want you to think for a second about what happens every day. How many of you flew here? Me too. Think about robots in the airport. I think that was thank you. You got me? Good. Think about robots in the airport. Think about the ability to put sensors on robots that will allow us to detect explosives, detect illegal contraband, detect drugs. You know what that means for you? You may not have to take your shoes off when you go to the airport or strip down to your skivvies. That you could actually leave your car, take your bag, walk to your gate. Because robots are there to help us do the primary missions that we need to do. Let me switch gears for a second, though, and talk to you about where I believe R&D needs to go, particularly in the not-too-distant future. I think the issue of battery life and power regeneration is going to continue to be an issue that we're going to have to work on. And it's an issue that affects not only robots, but all of our subsystems. I'm a huge proponent in open standards, but I would love to see a standardized approach to how we think about power and power sources. I think the whole issue of composite materials and continued work and funding into composite materials is incredibly important. I was there yesterday. I saw the robot tip. It happens. It would just be really bad if that had tipped on Granny. But you start to think about lighter. You start to think about how composite materials can help deal with the problems that you were talking about as far as the heat or coolness as we start to think about prosaics. When you start to think about composite materials that can protect both the responder and the robot, it becomes incredibly important. I can tell you one of the scariest things that the firefighter faces, knowing that there's been a fire in the house, because the minute you open the door or provide an oxygen source, you have the potential for a blowback. And I can tell you, I have seen and been on scenes where firefighters have done an initial vent, and the force of the explosion has blown them all the way into the backyard, if they're lucky. If they're not lucky, it kills them. So imagine that one simple task of that robot being able to open the door and what that would mean to the safety of our first responders. But we can't do that right now. And we're going to have to continue to not only develop the robot, but also the composites to protect the robot. I heard yesterday at your briefing, and I think it was, you're spot on. How do we produce really affordable LiDAR, really cheap? And how do we deploy it in ways that we haven't even thought about? So we start to think about our situational awareness and understanding our mapping issues. We got to drive the price down, because one of the problems with my population, with the first responder population, is that they can't afford incredibly expensive robots. So it's got to be easy to use. It's got to be inexpensive. I also think, and this is the next area that we're going to have to get serious about at some time, and that's the whole issue of comms, integrated communications. Take any after-action report from Oklahoma City bombing to everyone since, and communications is identified as an ongoing problem. You talk to the folks in the field, whether in the Department of Defense, Department of Homeland Security, and our state and locals, communications is a problem. So thinking through and really getting serious about how do we address degraded communications and how we start to think about robotics as a potential platform, not only to receive, but also help us in that situation, is something that I believe that we continue to need to put money into. Finally, there are actually two more. It's not going to be potentially intuitive, but an area of research that I think we're going to have to get serious in is getting people to really look at the issue of privacy and privacy rights, and what does that mean in a world of robotics, and in a world where machines know more about us than we may know ourselves. And how do we deal with that? How do we deal with the operational issues, but also the ethical issues? Because it's kind of neat if you really think about it. I'm a little pudgy. If I start to have a stroke, the nanotechnology in my body could actually be calling 911 for me before I even know it. But I would like to know before somebody calls 911 about me. So how do we start to think about that interreaction? And then finally, and this is near and dear to my heart because I'm dealing with it right now, how do we deal with counter-robotics? So how do we identify, how do we mitigate, and how do we defeat robotics? Because it's not too crazy to think about people hacking robots. It's not too crazy to think about people wanting to do bad things with robots. So what happens when our law enforcement face the first armored robot who goes in to rob a bank? Although, honestly, guys, I think you're probably smart enough that you could hack the banking system without having to send the robot in, but that's just another problem we're going to have to deal with. We're seeing it now. We have a problem with drones and where drones should go and did not go. A situation not long ago where a drone landed actually landed in a tree in the White House. That was a sad situation, and for all you guys out there, don't drink and drone, because the gentleman who owned that drone had a few that night. But you start to think about how do we deal with these? How do we deal with this technology in ways that we can realize its incredible potential, but also make sure that it doesn't drive and change societies in ways that we don't. I'll sort of leave you with that thought. Again, I'd like to thank DARPA and the ability to be here, and thank you for your attention as one of the final speakers. And I look forward to working with you all in the future in this area. And the future's really, really bright, and congratulations, guys. You're an incredibly inspirational group of guys and gals. Okay? Thank you.
So I'd like to open up the floor now, take some questions. You can talk about space robotics or manufacturing or homeland security, any of the above. Yeah, Jess, if you can help identify him for me. As he said, with the headlights, a little hard to see. Well, I'll ask a question of Rodney, because one that's been, I think, has been interesting for some time. So I'll ask you a question, you can come up and answer it. Can you tell us where you think secure operating systems are going to be in the future with some of these manufacturing systems? Where do you think that's going to go?
Yeah, I think clearly, we've seen viruses get into some manufacturing overseas, and I think this is going to be a real issue. I was talking to the OSRF people yesterday about the 2.0 ROS, which is going to have more security in it. I think that's going to be an increasing issue for us as we start to integrate robots into the world, and it's a serious problem. And it gets to the, people can hack robots, people will be able to build robots. There will be asymmetries in some places. We saw that in Iraq and Afghanistan with the robots we put there and the measures that we had to come up against. But adding cybersecurity to that just makes it a whole lot worse, and is going to be a real challenge. And that's, I know an agency that should be looking at that. Okay.
Oh, there we go. Good. We got a question. Go ahead, please.
Gentlemen, as an official and several observers of the design of the DRC this week, one thing we did observe was this very insightful tension between two different design philosophies. We saw the one end of the spectrum of bipedal locomotion through a human environment, and then we saw the other end of the more so-called stable platforms or static platforms that involved wheeled locomotion or some hybrid thereof. And depending on who you talk to today, you might get different opinions on the subject. In my opinion, I saw a hybrid of the two, which generated an incredible advantage that ultimately propelled Team Keist to victory. I'm wondering what your thoughts are on what we saw here in the DRC about these hybrid platforms and the different forms of locomotion, and how they impact some of the problems that you're working on, like mobility upstairs, for example.
So I'm really excited about what I think of as like archetypical studies, where you look at different archetypes of machines. If you think about catching a mouse, nature offers at least 4 archetypes. You've got a snake, catches rodents well. You've got a bird of prey, you've got a cat, and then you've got young people like this who build a better mousetrap. So that at least 4 unique archetypes in nature for that one task. Now they can do lots of other things as well. At NASA, we've been experimenting with all sorts of what I consider lower body mobility systems. We've put dexterous upper bodies on 2 wheels, which was terrifying, 4 wheels. We've put wheels on the ends of limbs, like with the athlete systems. And I don't think we're done. I think there are all sorts of new combinations of mechanisms that combine wheels and tracks and limbs that will crawl and slither in ways that we can't even imagine yet. So I'm really excited to see what people will come up with, and don't think that we are done yet.
I mean, one of my concerns is that I hope science fiction and our own human arrogance hasn't led to bias in how we perceive what a robot should be. And in fact, I would prefer that robots don't look that don't look like they're humanoid, because these are tools, and I think it gets dangerous to start to think of them as anything other than a tool. There's all sorts of ethical issues there, but I think we need to be cognizant of how we think about robots. At least for me, is shaped by a lot of what I watched growing up, and that's why I found it interesting when in the earlier panel with the students asking about the definition of a robot. And as I sat there, I realized I didn't know what a robot was. I could tell you what I thought it looked like, but it goes back to Lost in Space, in the Jetsons, and my preconceived notion. And I think this whole field shouldn't go or have preconceived notions. So just a thought about what the best shape is, because I don't know what it is. But it doesn't have to look like us in order to be a really good tool. In fact, it probably isn't.
Hey, so I have a question sort of related to the idea of the legal and ethical issues as robots work more with humans and something goes wrong. Like a self-driving car is never going to be 100% perfect, but neither are people. So at what point does it, as engineers, what do we have to think about to address those issues, that we're comfortable making robots that work with humans, knowing that they're never going to be 100% perfect, because that's not possible in such a way that we can still be ethical and still make improvements. So I just wondered what your thoughts, any of you, had on that.
So my answer doesn't, I'll answer first. This doesn't reflect the position of the administration or the Department of Justice attorneys. All I think we can do is do our best due diligence and understand that technology is going to change. If we waited for cars to be intrinsically safe, they still wouldn't be on the road. So I think we're going to have to think that way. I think this is an area that will create a whole new case law, and attorneys are going to argue with judges and juries about what should or should not have been done. But I don't think that should stop the technology from being deployed. In fact, I don't believe it will. I believe there's going to be some very interesting conversations, though, particularly as we start to think about regulation. Or where we want the law to be as it pertains to these devices. We've already seen it. You see a split where 21 states already have laws against the flying of drones. But at the same time, I think the technology is going to drive such a change that the law and regulation are going to have to keep up.
So you probably shouldn't answer because you have a
try it?
company that could be sued.
You want to try it, Rod? Yeah, both of you want to try it. Yeah.
Since I work for the federal government, I can't get sued as easily as Rod. I look for the day when we see cars driving around and they've got a little light on them that says that they're being driven without a human, and because of that, we trust them more. When they're coming right at us on a little country road, in a 2-lane road, and we see that little light on them, we're not as worried. But when the light's not on, we give it a wider berth because it's got a human driving it, and what could happen, right? That's where I would like to get to, where we would count on the machine, and I think we're going to get there sooner than you think.
I've got two answers to this. For my own, I'm not sure where the question went to, but for my own generation of building of robots, I want them to feel safe to me. So at my company, I will go up to any robot at any time and put my head in the way of it moving. And I feel that comfortable about it, and that leads me to say this is a safe robot. May there be some circumstances where things go wrong? Of course, we can't get 100%. But people in the world are very reticent to bring in new technologies, and I think that will be a damping factor. And I think if we look at self-driving trains, we see that has come out over 50 years. The BART system in San Francisco, in the Bay Area, was meant to be self-driving. It was an outcry against not having a driver, so a driver went in. Then, over years and years, we started to see self-driving trains in very constrained situations, airports, going from terminal to terminal. People got more comfortable with them. So now you see, for instance, the city of Toulouse has a self-driving train system, which we couldn't introduce back 50 years ago. And in Washington, D.C., the Red Line was using self-driving to pull up. There was an accident, and for 6 years, it went back to humans driving the trains, decreased the efficiency of the trains by about 20% because the humans weren't as good at coming right up to the point and stopping. And it's only in the last few months, after a 6 years hiatus, that they're starting to go back to having the self-driving. So I think we may well see that sort of thing with robot deployments where the general population says no. And that's just the way it's going to be. And it'll go back and forth. And by the way, on the self-driving cars, unless the self-driving cars give an indication of what they're going to do, I think people are going to feel that they're second-class citizens and the self-driving cars are first-class citizens and aren't going to like it.
Yes, go ahead.
Keeping on the ethics train, so they've done, or I've seen reports that when people bring their Roombas in to get service, that they want their Roomba back, that they feel personally about it, or that there's been studies of soldiers going to protect their packbots, which is not ideal, right? And you mentioned that we think we should see these things as tools, but then everyone noticed all the audience groaning when something bad happened or cheering when something good happened. So obviously people are primed to have these emotional attachments to robots. How do you think that will change, or should we combat it? Or?
Yeah, we certainly saw that in Iraq and Afghanistan with people coming into the depot with a completely unrepairable packbot, wanting that packbot fixed rather than being issued a new one. At iRobot, we still see a lot of naming. You can buy clothes for your Roombas. Third parties. So there is sometimes an over-emotional attachment. My thing I have to deal with at my company, and I've sort of given up, I call our robots its, but everyone else calls them he's. And I say, why is it a he? It's an it. But people want to give it a gender, and I don't know what that gender means. So, you got to listen to the customer. People do this. How do you accommodate it, but not make over expectations of what these devices are? Sometimes we see people building robots where they put in features which are visual, which make a promise that then they can't keep, which leads to disappointment. So I think it's important. Gets back to you don't want to make it look like it. You don't build a robot that looks like Albert Einstein unless it's as smart as Albert Einstein, because otherwise it's going to disappoint.
I was thinking more of Angela Jolie, but Albert Einstein, I guess, would be okay.
All right, we'll take one last question. Yep. Go ahead.
So I have what probably sounds like a simple question, but I think it's maybe a loaded one. For all of you, in particular for Dr. Griffin, what is your perspective on how do we test, right? That could mean everything from simulation-based things to the logistics and the practicality of big events. And I'm just very curious what the best way is to make sure that we don't do things that work just in a research context, but they're actually fieldable.
If I could, this is an area where I don't believe we can rely just upon computer-aided modeling. So as you start to think about GIFX or OpEx or bringing these to the field, first in controlled settings and then in pilots, I believe that's the way that we're going to have to go and create the sort of virtuous cycle of operators working with technologists in order to define and redefine how these technologies can best be applied. One of the problems that I have, even in my own shop, particularly in my own shop, is things that work well in the lab and work well with the technologists don't translate well into operations. And one of the things that we're going to have to make sure we do is that we send technologists with the technology to make sure that the operators understand that it's theirs. And we're going to have to do that at all level of government. One of the problems that I faced as a chief is that anytime I deployed a new technology, I had one shot to deploy it. And if it didn't work as promised the first time around, that technology would be painted with the rumor of doesn't work, it's going to get you killed, throw it away, don't touch it. And I would have to wait for a whole new generation to occur within my organization before I could reintroduce technology. So what you're talking about, making sure that this is ready for prime time before we sell it, is incredibly important. At the same time, though, I don't think that we're ever going to be able to understand what the capacity is of these systems until we get them into the hands of users and let them play with it and do things that will just amaze us. Or they'll break it, one of the two. Usually they break it first, and then we come back and figure out how to make them fireproof or marine-proof or police-proof.
Great. Thanks very much. Please give a round of applause to our speakers. And now we're going to wrap up the event. Gil Pratt's going to come up and summarize everything.
Alrighty. Well, this has been an incredible 3 days, and an incredible 3 weeks before, and then an incredible 3 months and 3 years. Just amazing. Thank you all for coming today. I think we heard some extraordinary talks from experts, from young people. I certainly have loved today. I thought the workshop actually was some of the best part of what we've done because it helps us to understand the real lessons of what we've done, and I think it's absolutely fantastic. What I would like to do is actually focus on something having to do with human-robot interfaces. Mark, don't go away. Turn around. So at DARPA, we have some program managers who are experts on human-robot interface. That's one right over there, Mark Masiri. And unlike me, he's still going to be there for a little while. And a lot of what we do in human-robot interface is between the operator and the robot. And we certainly explored that a bit at the DRC. We narrowed the communication channel. Just like when the microphones kept going out here, suddenly the communication channel went dead. And you had to interpret, what do you think this person is saying in between their words? And you somehow got that. That's one aspect of the problem. There's many, many others. And I think that there's all kinds of neat work to do there. But I want to pick up on one of the questions that was just asked, which was, what about those groans that we heard? What about the cheers that we heard? What about the person that wants their PackBot fixed? What about the reporter who said, is the MIT robot going to be okay? Because it got hurt yesterday. What about that? So, you know, the news is all about fear of AI. Our worries have always been, well, our robots, particularly the Atlas, right, kind of looks like the Terminator. And if it looks like the Terminator, it probably is the Terminator. And so we all should be shaking in our boots, you know, here comes, ought to be back, you know, all that sort of stuff. But what happened? It wasn't like that at all, right? There's this phenomenon called the uncanny valley. How many people have heard of the uncanny valley? It's this very strange thing, right? If a robot looks, or a puppet or a toy looks just like a person, that's okay. If it looks very different, if it like has a square head, square arms, right? Square legs, that's okay too. But if it's just a little bit off from being a person, somewhere in between, we get really anxious and uncomfortable. And that's bad. And I had always assumed that in the DRC, we would be fighting the uncanny valley all of the time because a lot of our robots are kind of a little bit close to that. But despite that, what happened? After just a little bit of time, people did this thing that was extraordinary. I had another worry. My worry was that everybody would be bored. Like, remember the DRC trials. What happened at the DRC trials? It took a half hour, 30 minutes we allocated for a robot to walk through a door, to open a door and walk through it. And I made the joke, you know, you haven't lived until you've spent 30 minutes watching a robot open up and walk through a door. You know, turning a valve, maybe that's exciting, but walking, you know, opening up a door. And yet, people did not get bored. People sat out in the sun with their hats on, baking in the desert here, for 2 days, watching robots essentially walk in slow motion, doing tasks, captivated by these things, identifying with them. And so there's another human-robot interface. There's people like Cynthia Brazil who've looked a little bit at this, which is not about the operator and the robot, but about the robot and society, the robot and people. Robots for us, what's going on. And I'm hopeful, and I agree with Rod, that we have to be very careful not to overpromise, right? We can't make the robot appear to be able to do more, fool people into thinking that it can do more, and then it ends up, oh, it's actually kind of dumb, and we were relying on it to be Albert Einstein, but we didn't do very well in physics when we kept asking it questions, right, for help prepare for our test. But I think there's something there that's largely unexplored. There's a whole lot more to do. I think it actually matters to DARPA. I think it matters to the private sector actually much more. If robots are going to be in our home, how do we manage that attachment? How do we figure out just the right way to make best use of that so that the robot is an integral member of our life, just the way that other people are, but we, of course, know that it's different. We know that our pets are different, that dogs are different. We've just begun to see that here. I think it's an incredibly strong phenomena. I was very surprised by it. It's the thing that I was surprised the most by at the DRC was the reaction of the crowd. People were entranced for 2 days straight. And I'm very glad that they weren't bored. They certainly weren't. There were plenty of wonderful things at the expo for us to see that I think were incredible. But why weren't we bored? We weren't. And I think there's a lot more to figure out there. Holly Yanko right there is actually working on a very neat study looking at HRI as part of the results from the DRC here. We have all kinds of results that are going to come out. There's going to be a special issue in the Journal of Field Robotics that's going to include a whole bunch of articles from the teams and also some from some of the work that we're doing. I think it's going to be amazing. And so lots of lessons from here. I really thank you all for coming. I think the future is tremendously bright for our field, and we really are just at the beginning. So thank you again, and good luck in the future.